Welcome to episode 5 of the Lily List podcast. JT Habersaat is an entrepreneur, stand-up comic, storyteller, and lives life by the DIY punk ethos. In this episode, we discuss the impact his parents had on him, how he shifted from a 9 to 5 to being his own boss, his writing career, and why we had to capture his DNR on this recording versus him speaking to a lawyer. As always, thank you for listening, and go to lilylist.com for more information about the podcast, our mission, and to access other resources that we make available. All right, JT.
Hey, man.
So, I don't remember at this point how many times you've been here.
I feel like at least half a dozen,
Okay.
but I'm trying to remember. I know the first time was with Brian Ziola, which was probably around 2016 or 17, realistically. Way pre-COVID.
Yeah.
And Mishka Shubali had told me about you and said Kurt's the best. And I, at the time, was a little wary of house shows, but Mishka's endorsement goes a long way.
Yeah.
And I remember instantly feeling comfortable with you and having a kind of camaraderie. So,
Well, it's great for us because, I started this Lily List thing really with the concept initially around like end of life planning, but I shifted it into this podcast because it really became the end of life stuff a lot of people find to be difficult.
Sure.
But the stories and the legacy is a little easier. And so I'm trying to sprinkle in experts, people that can speak to some of the end of life stuff, but also keep it so that people can share stories and talk about things. Think about their legacy.
Sure.
I know you mentioned your first book. I know you're finishing a second book.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a tome, to say the least.
It's a monster.
So you have a lot of stories, but I'm curious, you've kind of came up with this punk rock comedy thing. You've been doing it a long time.
Yeah.
And so, where did you grow up? How much do you think has been innate in your personality versus you had to kind of learn it and lean into it to get to where you are?
It's a good question. I grew up in upstate New York, and both my parents are super hard workers. The term workaholic gets tossed around a lot, and you could certainly accuse me of that in certain degrees, but I also do know how to chill out. Like, I'm always working, and COVID taught me, if nothing else, I need projects or I go crazy. Like, the hardest thing for me during COVID was not being able to travel because I'm so nomadic by nature in terms of the jobs that I do for the last, decade plus, is going places and I generate material by going places and getting stories and experiences. And when you're home getting to the mail is the big outing, there's no real material to generate. And not that I was feeling funny during COVID anyway. But to your point, I grew up in upstate New York, and my parents were both and continue to be very active and my mom, it's weird. I'm kind of an exact split down the middle of my parents, which is usually not the case. I feel like people are usually 60-40 or something like that. But my mom is very social, and she is like an event organizer and like that type of likes those kind of details and putting things together in that way. My dad is very gregarious in a smaller setting, but is certainly not anyone you would see speak on stage ever or anything like that. But he is very much always has to have a project and is doing something, or he goes squirrely also. So I very much have that. I need to be producing. So that's innate in me. As far as the punk rock comedy aspect of things, in college, I did a little bit of, I was very influenced by things like the British Whose Line Is It Anyway and Kids in the Hall. And so I had some buddies, I worked in radio in college, and I had some buddies around the radio station I thought were funny. And so we did this sketch improv group called the Five Drunken Immortals, where we would probably be canceled today because we dressed up in like Kung Fu geese, and it was taken from an old Kung Fu name. And we did that for about 2 years around colleges and stuff. It had some varying success. We got a little bit of a fan base around SUNY New Paltz, where I went to school, and we got drunk and had a good time. But after that, I was interested in radio, and that was when radio was still kind of a creative endeavor. And I did that in Woodstock, New York for a few years until things progressed. You know, when I first started, it was literally the playlist was in on index cards, color coded, and you play this song at this time, and then this spot was, an open area within the hour for the DJ to pick what they wanted to play. And this is on FM radio. This is commercial FM radio, WDST in Woodstock, where I don't know how well versed you or your listeners are in terms of radio, but Nick Harcourt, who went on to host KCRW's Mornings Becomes Eclectic, which is a pretty big show in the West Coast market, he was kind of my boss at the time. And when he left, he handed off his specialty show, Indie Flux, to me, and I got to program a full hour every week of whatever I wanted to play. And I mean, I'm talking Melvin's Folk Implosion, I wasn't obnoxious with it. I think that's why I continued and they let me do it. I wasn't going to blast Black Flag, but I could sneak in some very left of center stuff. I would Big Black and Jesus Lizard and stuff like that, as long as it was palatable in a way that I could kind of, not their most abrasive stuff. And so I was very much into music and that whole scene from the time I was 14, 15. As soon as somebody got a driver's license, I was going to Poughkeepsie, New York and taking the Metro North down to Manhattan and running around the Lower East Side. So I saw a lot of shows at CBGB's and the Bowery Ballroom and the Continental and Coney Island High and all those kind of venues, which most are gone now, sadly. But Irving Plaza, I saw a ton of shows there. And so I was very much just immersed and kind of fascinated with the underground aesthetic of New York. And so not from a hollowed ground. I wasn't obsessed with, I love the Ramones, and I had the good fortune to meet Joey Ramone one time. He showed up at the radio station and scared me out of my shoes. It's a story I tell sometimes. I think actually last time I was here, I told it, but more so I was curious with what was happening at the time. It wasn't like pining for the days of CBs and, I missed the Talking Heads. I'm like, fuck that. I want to go see David Byrne play solo right now. You know what I mean? Or, a lot of the new punk rock bands at the time, which now are kind of the forefathers of that scene, the Bouncing Souls I used to go see all the time, and Fishbone, and bands that are now kind of legacy acts I would go see all the time. And so that sprung out of college. I started started a magazine called Altercation Magazine, which was like a punk rock periodical because I was very disillusioned with Rolling Stone. In the intro, I eventually put out a book called The Altercation Archives once I had folded the zine, which was kind of like the final word on that with intros and all the interviews we had done. And I said, it was all, I could blame everything back to the Olsen twins, because at some point Rolling Stone put the Olsen twins on the cover, and that was the last straw for me when I was 23 or whatever. I was like, the fucking Olsen twins are on here? Like, what is that? It has nothing to do with nothing. Like, this magazine has jumped the shark so much that and also Alternative Press was a really important magazine to me early on, because they were literally that. They were alternative press. And then eventually I remember they put Limp Bizkit on the cover, and I was like, now you're just chasing the ad revenue and this sucks. So like anything kind of good, it was born out of frustration and a middle finger raised in the air. And between working in radio, I had the leg up that, independent labels like Alternative Tentacles and Discord did not get much radio play. So when I would contact them and say, I'm spinning your stuff on FM, they would say, well, what can we do for you? And so I had access to speaking early on with people like Jello Biafra, and for better or for worse, he could have been nicer, but Jello Biafra and Ian Mackay, and, I drove to the city to meet Henry Rollins, and his later interview had canceled. So instead of a half hour, I got an hour and a half. And so I just sat in a room with Rollins around, 1997, and just, on his Come In and Burn album when he was still on DreamWorks. So, it's a long tail on this kite, I know, but all of that informed how I approached comedy when I decided to do it. Cause I moved to Austin, Texas from New York in 2005. And I had been burnt out on putting on shows. I had been in some bands, including a semi-comedic band called Goblet, which was like a Dungeons and Dragons Spinal Tap band or we dressed up like wizards and monsters and had fire and smoke machines and all this crazy shit. And we actually all had some success as well. We used to have people show up wearing armor to our shows. And we opened for Bad Brains, we opened for Guar, we opened for the Murder Junkies. So we ended up doing some real stuff. But it hit a limit where certain members had kids or were in, quote unquote, adult jobs and stuff and just couldn't tour. And so when opportunities kept coming, we had to say no. I was like, we've hit the ceiling. And if we can't go forward with it, what's the point? So when I moved to Austin, I didn't want to be in anything collaborative. I'd been burned out on collaboration. And I said, well, I've always liked stand-up quite a lot. And early on, I was a huge fan of like Rollins' spoken word because it was funny. I mean, it was affecting, but it was funny. And the course of humor that was innate to what he was saying always really kind of grabbed my attention. And the storytelling too. Like, I really liked that. And of course, George Carlin and, Eddie Murphy and all the people that most people will kind of point to as like legacy gods. But I always had a hearty appreciation for stand-up, and I said, let me try doing stand-up. That's solitary. I don't know anyone here, so it'd be a good test, because I was bartending at the main punk rock bar and working overnights doing editorial at a publishing house that did half a dozen local like newspapers when I left New York, and so I was pretty socially enfolded into the scene. Like, everybody kind of knew me. And so it was nice to go somewhere where no one did. Like, I needed that mentally. And so after a while, I got to know some bands and musician types in Austin, and I finally decided I'm going to do a show. And so I had some friends in these bands that came to see me. I booked a show at a rock club. When I first started, I had a bit of chip on my shoulder where I'm like, I don't want to do comedy clubs. That feels too, like, there's a rule. The way you're supposed to start comedy is you go to open mics, and then you start going to the clubs, and eventually you get up 10 minutes of material where they think you're good enough, you host, and then you do that for a year. And then if you're good enough after that, and you can somehow have 25 to 30 minutes of polished stuff, then you get to feature, and then eventually down the road, yeah, it was too long for me. I was too impatient with it. I said, got to wait a year to build up 10 minutes to get this thing that pays $25. Fuck that. I'm going to book my own show and do 30. You know what I mean? It was just the way I was wired. And so I started getting kind of this left of center reputation around town. Other comics had some real animosity for me also, because there's which I understand in retrospect. There's a degree of arrogance, I guess you could say, of saying, I'm going to skip the way it's done, especially when you're new to town. People are going, who is this asshole? And like, what is he doing? But also people would show up. So, I mean, I knew enough band people that they'd come. And so the venues I was working at were stoked on it. I'm like, yeah, do it again.
There's also, though, ingenuity in finding ways to get out of that trap, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've always been a big, you don't like something, build a better mousetrap or shut up. It's that DOA thing, talk minus action equals 0. And so that's always been ingrained in me. And I've, like anybody, there's certain times where I complain about something, the way I rail today about how feature comedians in comedy clubs, the pay hasn't changed since 1989, and that's insane. But I can't do anything about that. That's just the industry as a whole. But I can do things about what venues I choose to play. That I can control. And so it worked in my favor in a way that at that time, and again, we're talking 2005, I moved to Austin. So by 2007, because I didn't do it right away. About 2007, I was pursuing stand-up, I guess you could say. Not as a full-fledged career, but I was doing it fairly regularly. At that time, things had started to shift. You had people like the Comedians of Comedy with Patton Oswalt and Brian Posehn and Maria Bamford that were doing rock clubs almost exclusively. And Doug Stanhope had built up his own kind of Grateful Dead-ish following and was doing whatever venue would have him pretty much that wasn't a comedy club. He was actually banned from Cap City Comedy Club when I got there. And so when those people came to town, they all seemed to ask, we need a local opener and we want somebody that's doing something that's not just a club comic, and everybody said, "Oh, JT's the guy to talk to." And so, and this also you have to bear in mind, this was pre-Instagram and anything like that. So it's not like I could just pull up a ton of clips. I don't remember. YouTube may have been in its infancy around then, but like, they pretty much had a coast on reputation and recommendations from other people in venues that they trusted, and then you just had to not mess up. You had to just do the job, and then maybe you get invited back. And so, that's how I met Brian Posehn, and then like Janine Garofalo, and then I got tapped to open for Andy Dick, which was a hot mess, as you might imagine. And then Stanhope was the first one that I really connected with because he was looking for a new venue. I'd interviewed him for this other magazine I was freelance writing for called AMP, which is now rebranded as New Noise magazine and still going. But I did an interview with Stanhope, and he said, "I'm tired of this venue I've been at. Do you know any others?" And I said, "Yeah." And I called up Red 7, which was like the main rock club and about the same capacity he would play, which is like 300 or 400 people at that point. And I got him a show in an hour because I'm a fast moving guy. When it comes to something like you need something done, I'm going to go do it, and he was like, "It's booked already?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Well, you better open the show." I'm like, "Awesome." And I remember Martha Kelly was also on that show. This was 2007. And Martha Kelly has got on to do great things. She's on the show Baskets with Louis Anderson, and she's been in like, she's in like Marvel movies now and stuff and doing great. But at the time, she was like a very just respected Austin comic. And Martha was running late. I did my 10 minutes. I kept it very tight, and it went really well. And then Martha was running late on a traffic or whatever, but she wasn't there when she was supposed to be on. And I said to the crowd, I said, "I promised Doug I'd keep it tight. Thanks so much. Up next, Martha Kelly." And I went to walk off, and Stanhope came out and said, "Martha's not here yet. JT's going to keep going until she's here." And I was like, "Oh." And so, not to, I don't know. I have a hard time kind of tooting my own horn or whatever, but a lot of comics, like I said, if they were hosting or whatever, they have their 10 minutes and that's all they had. So in a lot of ways, it could have been a nightmare if that's what I was, but I was used to doing 30 or whatever out of just doing what I wanted to do. So I had other stuff. So I just kept going. I ended up doing 35 minutes the first time I ever worked with Doug. And it went very, very well. And that led to us working together every time he came to town. And I would start going out to his desert parties out in Bisbee, Arizona. And through his parties, I met a lot of comics that I admire, met people like Tom Rhodes out there and, just a lot of like-minded folks. And so it spiraled from that, but I decided at a certain point I wanted to do something branded as punk rock. So I started this thing, the Altercation Punk Comedy Tour. And Altercation was for my magazine, so I figured I'd just keep the brand going. And I wanted to have a little gang. I wanted to have like my own comedians of comedy. And so I had got invited to do some dates on the Vans Warp Tour by that point. And so I met some comics on there and invited them because I'm like, well, that's the punk rock tour. And I didn't want everyone from Austin. I wanted it spread out. And there were some people in New York that I had known from bartending that had comedy chops and were kind of, eager to try. And so I had a rotating lineup of 4 to 5 people, and we would tour insane. We did a tour for 5 weeks one time with 1 day off to fly from the East Coast to the West Coast, like stuff now that I can't even comprehend. And it took its toll because we're charging $5 a head at the door, maybe 10. Yeah. And it was weird to have comedy in rock clubs then. So it wasn't a comedy audience. It was very much fighting uphill sometimes, even though it went pretty well. But, you take $5 or $10 at the door and then you split that by 4 or 5 and add gas and living into that. And it's very unsustainable. And I also quickly realized through just doing it that my natural kind of ability to I'm a details guy. I'm a producer at heart. So wanting to know what the deal is, who do I settle up with? Are there other opening acts on the thing? Blah, 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 blah. Doing the driving. I became the dad of the tour and everyone else became party time. And after a few of those tours, I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm just babysitting and then having to headline at the end of the night, And so it just didn't work. It was just, and it became a collaboration that I was trying to avoid coming out of bands. I was like, I don't want to collaborate anymore. This is, even though it's solitary sets, there's too many opinions.
Yeah.
So that kind of imploded, though. I think I did the Altercation tour until about 2011 or so, 2012. And then I continued touring, teaming up with people to feature for me. I did one or two other kind of co-headlining shows that Stanhope helped present. Like he would attach his name to it, like Doug Stanhope Presents, which helped from like a press point of view and stuff like that. But I slowly just realized that the reality was the promoters that I have been working with and the venues I've been working with, whatever I called it, they were booking me, and whoever I brought was cool with them. And so I just said, well, this seems silly. I still had a day job doing marketing at that point. And then in around 2014, I was at a point where I used up all my vacation time and I was saying no to offers that were coming in that felt like missed opportunities. And I finally said, I'm just going to go all in and try this. And if it doesn't work, I can always find a job. And that's a decade ago. So I just keep doing it, When I'm home right now, arguably Austin has, in the press at least, has this paintbrush of being the comedy mecca, because you have all these clubs that open down there, like Joe Rogan opened his Mothership. And for better, for worse, like that's the new LA stomping grounds. It's like the new Comedy Store, including a lot of the people that used to work at the Comedy Store now work there. Like, and I'm friends with some of those people, the head bartender, the head booking agent, the head manager of all of the Comedy Store now are there. And so, and you have, we went from COVID having 2 clubs survive to now there's 9 clubs in 10 square blocks. It's too many, but the perception is Austin is the center of the comedy world right now, as far as the U.S. is concerned. And I live there. And so whenever I meet other comics, like, wow, you must get up all the time and just be like, and I'm like, not at all, because to me, I do stand up at home, and home meaning Austin, like a proper show 2 or 3 times a year. And one of them is probably a festival, and maybe including my own, but it's like, I do this as a career. And I like to do the road. I like to go places where people don't know me because it feels more honest. I don't like to pad the deck with friends. That feels weird to me sometimes to do a home show. And so when I'm home, I'm working on either these toy projects I do or this book that I'm trying to finish, or I'm just chilling out. Like I have no get up and go to hit the stage. I for better, for worse, don't have that need to be on stage thing, which a lot of comics have. Yeah. Even really good, kind of like my level working class, it's their job comics, we'll have a few days off at my house to relax. And they'll be like, we should go hit some mics. And I'm like, why? They're like, don't you feel that stage need? I'm like, not at all. Yeah. Not at all. I'm good with taking weeks off without going on stage. And I just don't think about it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good, maybe transition point for, so I don't know, your path so far seems to be around kind of telling and capturing stories, and fits right in line with what I'm doing. But now, when you get to a point where you're not old, you're still in good shape. Or you're getting older.
Depends on the day.
Getting older, and I mean, do you ever consider? And when I say legacy to a lot of people, they tend to think it's financial, or it's like leaving something to the Cat Foundation or whatever. But I think of it more broadly in regard to, what is it that all of these pieces that you're putting together, what do they add up to? What are they going to say? Or
yeah, I mean, I'm always working towards something. I don't know. I try not to, and maybe this is the, therapy talking, but I used to pre-pandemic really just live my life in advance, where it was, and you have to for this job, you have to book out 6 months in advance. You have to know where you're going. Like I have shows on the books, we're barely May right now. I have shows booked for November. I just have to. But that being said, I used to live there. I used to just be like, all right, next week I'm here, and then that week after that. And now I really try and be like, all right, well, that's all good. And I have that set. But right now I'm talking to my friend Kurt here. And tonight I have a show with Lydia Lunch in Richmond. And then I fly back home, and next weekend I'm on the road with Brian Posehn. But right now, we're right here having this conversation. So I've gotten a lot better about that, compartmentalizing where I'm at, which is important because you can miss a lot if you just keep looking towards the future. In terms of legacy, I mean, it's twofold. I've released some albums. I mean, I've been signed to Stand-Up Records and 800 Pound Gorilla, which arguably are two of the biggest comedy labels in the country. And so I've released 4 albums over the past 13, 14 years, which as far as output, I think is pretty good. I've had frustrations with the releases of those, and working in tangent with other people is always a dice roll, and there's pluses and minuses to be had there. But the fact that I didn't self-release those or have friends put them out means something to me. So that feels good. I'm happy with my previous books. This new book, which is a kind of an oral, I hate to throw the history part on there, but it started off as my version of Please Kill Me, which I think is the definitive oral history book of music, the CBGB scene, which was very instrumental to me when I read that book by Legs McNeil many years ago. But what this has turned into is more, someone the other day called it sounds like you're writing the Kitchen Confidential of Anthony Bourdain's book about, what it means to be a chef. Yeah. And that's what this is. It's what it means to be a stand-up. And so I've spent the last 2 years crisscrossing New York to LA, interviewing people like Patton Oswalt, Maria Bamford, all the kids in the hall, Joe DeRosa, Dana Gould, Bobcat Goldthwait, all these people that I somehow am lucky enough to call, if not peers, friends. And it's a pretty epic 600-page book that is in the final throes of getting finished and set to sell. And so that is something that, and mixed in with that are people like Kristen Leidy or Brian Ziola, who I first toured with here, and just comics that people may not know, but their story, it's not a starfucker story. It's about doing the job. So even if you don't know these comics necessarily, some of them, their job is comedy for the most part. I didn't want hobbyists, which sounds dismissive because it's hard to do stand-up full-time. But I wanted people that this is their job, large, or they have, label association or something that makes it real, and people can certainly debate me on the concept of what that means, real, but I think you get what I'm saying. And there's some validation there. And so, but I think that people who are going to read this book are it's not going to matter because the stories are compelling, and it's for every story a Dana Gould tells, the story Kristen Leidy tells to me is equally compelling, because she's a union organizer, and the concept of how that, she does stand up because it pretty much bats away the down parts of her day job, because she says, nobody's happy when they come to the union organizer. there's strife, you're dealing with a sexist boss, or you're dealing with unfair wages or whatever. She says, no one comes for the laugh to the union organizer. So it's very important to her to have an outlet creativity wise. So, I think this book, I'm proud of my other books. This book feels different in that I feel like this book could reach a lot of people. And it's something that I've tried to make evergreen in that 20 years from now, someone starting stand-up could pick it up and get a lot of value out of it. It's kind of similar to Studs Terkel's Working, which I don't know if you're familiar with, but it was a book in the 70s where he just interviewed working people. And it was like, a funeral director or a garbage man or whatever, and a stewardess, a flight attendant. And so it's a pretty fascinating book. Nobody know. I couldn't tell you the name of any of those people in that book, but I remember being fascinated by it.
Yeah.
And so as far as legacy, I feel like this book has a lot to offer. And I should also point out, I'm not in it. I don't interview myself. Like, I do an intro. Eddie Pepitone did a great intro for me, but it's more the curation of the book and just trying to capture through my interviews with them what I want people to kind of know. It's really like a curation or a big mixtape is what I kind of painted it. Aside from that, I mean, it's great if people like my comedy, but for me, my own legacy is getting to work with people like Lydia Lunch, like being able to go out on tour with Lydia for 12 days. Like that's, I was excited and a little nervous because it's, she's very much confrontational and not comedy.
Yeah.
And I was like, how's this going to go? And so it's been a good challenge to me. But I knew off the get-go, I'm like, even if I bomb every night and it goes shitty, like it's an experience I need to have. I'm not going to pass on that because I'm scared about what it might be, And I've gotten to open for Rollins a few times doing spoken word, which is very hard to do. He is very selective about what, I think aside from like Janine Garofalo and Mark Maron, no other comic has worked with Henry. Even just becoming, I don't want to go down name drop alley, but like, people like Greg Turkington, who's Neil Hamburger is his alter ego, or, Todd Glass or David Yao from the Jesus Lizard. Like these are all people I met through doing stand-up and now they're legit friends, And so that the fact that, Brian Posehn and I are incredibly tight and, Brian's done so much from Mr. Show. He's done horror movie stuff, The Devil's Rejects and the Sarah Silverman program, and he's written comic books and he knows all these metal bands that we have in common. And, but we just worked together in Philadelphia. And what's cool to me is I know other people that he may not from doing it. And I said, hey, do you mind if I put the Dead Milkmen on the guest list? And he said, what? He's like, I love the Dead Milkmen. I'm like, well, they're coming. And he's like, totally. And to make Posehn, who knows so many people, light up like a kid with excitement because I got Rodney, the singer from the Dead Milkmen, to come hang out with us for the night, that means that's cool to me, And again, it's not a yay me thing. My self-deprecation voice is very strong. It's something that I work on again therapy-wise because I'm getting better with the imposter syndrome, which is a common thing amongst people, but in creatives. But it's genuine friendship with these people, which is different than meeting someone you like and having a few moments. You know what I mean? It just feels different. And so, Raymond Pettibon did my first album cover art. Like that's crazy to me. Last time I was in New York, he invited me over to his house and studio. And we traded art in the mail during pandemic. And again, it sounds braggadocious in a way, but it's mind-blowing to me that this is what I get to do. And I feel very lucky. And like you said, it's not about having fancy cars and stuff like that. It's very much economy of scale. Yeah. I make way less money than I did when I was working in marketing, but it's so much more rewarding.
Yeah.
Like to me, being in my late 40s and not having a boss is, I win. I've won. And with the comedy festival in terms of legacy, that's a thing I've had many comics say to me, doing Altercation Fest, which is something I started because I wanted like-minded people to meet each other. Because a lot of them don't get to travel geographically like I do as far as widespread. And I'm like, there's people that are awesome in Florida. They may not meet people who are awesome in Minneapolis, who may not meet people who are awesome in Southern California. And so I wanted to have a gathering where all those people could see each other at least once and trade info. And then when they come to their town, they have a show and they know somebody. And so I've been very happy legacy-wise with the festival because I had many people tell me, doing Altercation Fest changed my career. I got signed to this label because they saw me there, or I was able to get shows because I met other people there, or, that means a lot. Yeah. The fact that it has an impact, because it's certainly not, I make some money on it on a good year. Pandemic was certainly a hard crunch, but I also pay as many people as I can. And so it's the type of thing, it's not my cash cow. It's not like I do the festival and then I coast the rest of the year. But the fact that it's held in such high regard as kind of the comedian's comedian festival, if that's a thing, or a counterculture festival. And also I get a lot of people who identify as queer or people of color that say, I feel comfortable here. Like, and also though, I am very anti-woke comedy. It's the type of thing. I'm not going to book a trans person just because they're trans. If they're funny, hell yeah. But I'm not going to book someone to fill some sort of quota. And if people don't like that, that's fine with me. Like if they look at the lineup and say, wow, it's really white guy beard heavy with your glasses this year. I say, yeah, maybe. That's just how it fell down. That's how I try. I am very aware of having it diverse, but I book funny first because you can't argue with funny, But that being said, I try and keep it super inclusive. And the fact that people that are somewhat marginalized or outsider that have told me I feel so comfortable here and I've met other people, like it felt very welcoming. That matters to me. That means a lot in terms of legacy, especially since, you look at the broad picture of stand-up comedy, there's a lot of creeps. There's a lot of people that, sometimes I think the cancel thing gets ridiculous. And if it is that, then I'll say so out loud if asked. I don't feel the need to broadcast my opinions on social media, but if I'm asked, I'm not going to lie. That being said, you have some very high profile people that have gotten busted for creeping on younger girls or whatever you want to call it. And the reality is they're still getting booked by fucking Live Nation because they put asses in seats. And, you can't argue with economics. People either come or they don't. This is America. You can like it or not like it, but that's what decides who gets booked. I am of the ilk that if someone's a creep, I'm not going to book them, even if it would be financially beneficial to me, even if it's something that would give my kind of cult festival a larger platform in terms of their audience. I'm not going to do it. And I like that power. I'm not going to lie. I've had people who represent, I had management that represents Seinfeld and Chris Rock. And they said, well, we've got this hot new young comic we'd really like to get on Altercation. And I said, well, I'm already booked up. I've got my friends in these slots. So they said, well, just bump one of your friends to next year or something. I said, I'm not going to do that. And they cannot believe it. Like they're literally like it's silence on the phone and then like a really? Like they're in awe that someone is telling them no, that I won't bump a kind of unknown in their eyes or someone that doesn't have industry pull or whatever to put this hot new whatever there. And no, like I have no problem telling you no. And that's not coming from a yay me, take down the industry, burn it down type of thing. It's just, I'm not going to disappoint my friend who I already gave this offer to just to push him through for some shitty industry shine.
Yeah.
It's just not who I am.
Okay. Well, we forget sometimes that these people are humans.
Right.
Like they're actually like, however famous somebody is, however big they are, or however small they are, if they're working hard to get there, they're still just human beings.
Yeah.
And, when you're at a club and after the club and you have to be on and you've got to be there for people.
It's incredibly taxing.
And not saying it's a bad thing.
Nope.
Well, it's part of the job.
Part of the job.
I work a job. I have things I have to do, things I can't say, but it's part of the job.
Exactly right. And that's what the industry doesn't see, but it's always been that way.
Yeah.
It's Hollywood, that's showbiz, baby. It's always been that way and it never goes away. I have friends that do theaters and they're constantly, why don't you could do an arena? There's always this, there's a comic pal of mine that I so admire named Kyle Kinane, and he is so funny. He's from Chicago and he's got this blue collar streak that's so self-deprecating and salty in the best way, and that he keeps himself in check. And it's this thing of like, well, what about this? What if we turn this into a sitcom? Or what if don't you want to go on these auditions? And it's like, he's like, I have stand-up. Stand-up's enough. Yeah. That's what I wanted to do. He's like, I make as much as a union plumber doing what I want to do. I don't need that other shit, and there's a weird thing in the industry of showbiz where because agents get 10%, they always are pushing you to get to the next thing, because it's more money for them. And, you just have to know what you want, and honestly, I'm at a bit of a crossroads right now where I love doing stand-up, but I'm also, after doing all these releases and, I'm kind of at a point where I'm like, I don't know, like this tour with Lydia has been great because it's not a paintbrush of comedy, like in a comedy club. I can, like last night at the show, I did a reading out of my book. I've never done that. I can lean into more story stuff where it's humorous and entertaining, but not necessarily laugh.
Yeah.
And so that stuff is more interesting to me at the moment. I want to write more books, and so, um, if that happens, that happens. I don't know what's next as far as my comedy. I've got a brand new 20, 25 minutes right now, but everyone keeps asking me, when's the next special? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't want to think about it. If I feel like in a year from now or 2 years from now, I want to do a new special because it's something that I'm eager to do and I have the stuff to share, then cool. But if not, it's, having autonomy and having your own timeline, I think is the most important thing.
Yeah.
That's something that's worth immeasurable, like setting your own schedule and just kind of being your own boss while still paying the bills, is the goal for me.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And I'm really looking forward to the book. So
Thanks, man. I've got a lot of, yeah, I've been keeping it super quiet, and also because, not that I'm a superstitious guy, but like, it's such a massive project and it hasn't really been done. Like there's no real oral history stand-up thing, and comedy's so popular right now. I feel like it's got a very broad reach.
on the business end, to sort of close out, I know your dad just had a health scare, and I hope
Yeah.
he's doing better.
He's doing great. Yeah. He had a open heart surgery, but he's doing good.
Yeah. But so, and I know we got to tie up too, because you guys got to start getting to Richmond. But on that end, one of the things that I do think about with this project is end of life planning.
Sure.
Where are you at with that? Have you thought about it? Have you done anything?
Well, my family, constantly, my mom's like, you have to get your will together. And, I mean, that, I don't know. I've shifted. Sometimes I feel like a bad adult because the concept of retirement is something, I'm looking down the barrel of 50 and I don't plan to retire anytime soon. But the concept of that is like, you need to have X amount of savings. And my parents are very much involved in like stocks and like all that sort of stuff. And so I know that's true, but also something I learned from the pandemic is I'm going to work until I fall over. That's the reality of it. I'm not the concept of like being retired at 60 or 65 and then like doing what you want to do or traveling. I'm like, I do that now.
Yeah.
And I like to travel for vacation too. But like the concept of being like 60 and having 20 plus years of just open-ended whatever, I'll go crazy without having something to do. I'm just going to work until I cannot anymore. And so in a way, that's a relief because it takes that off I just don't think about it.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'll be the weird fucking guy bartending at 80. I don't know,
Well, the reason I bring it up is, my friend Justin
right.
dropped dead at 47.
Yeah.
Unexpected. Well, I got diagnosed with cancer, is dead 6 weeks later. Another friend of mine at 50 had a stroke and died.
Yeah.
And they had nothing planned. And the tough part is if you die, that's in a way a little easier.
Mm-hmm.
As long as you don't have people fighting over anything that you had.
I don't have kids. I don't have anything. I mean, my brother's very successful as an architect,
The big piece is if you don't die, though. So having your like, what do you want to happen if you're in a coma? What do you want to happen?
I certainly don't want to. I'm certainly a DNR guy. I don't want to hang on.
Yeah.
Just to hang on. Quality of life is a huge thing for me. I mean, it's very, very sad, but I was talking with Bobcat Goldthwait, and he said this on podcast, so I feel okay kind of relaying this. He's not really far out there, but he was best friends with Robin Williams.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, oh, Robin Williams, he must have been like the sad clown and just like, and he certainly had melancholy, but not that I knew him. But from what Bobcat has told me, Robin Williams had some sort of debilitating mental thing going on that was very similar to like a Parkinson's or whatever.
Parkinson.
And he was losing who he was, and it was not going to get better. And so his suicide, I think, was largely a moment of clarity of I'm losing who I am and fuck this. And, so I understand that. But in terms of, I've always been wired to be the guy that is, you can get hit by a bus tomorrow, like live for today as much as you can. I think, though, I try to do that in a way that is, I like to party and stuff like that, but I try and do it in a way that is, if there's any shrapnel or fallout, it's only to myself. Like it's only to my liver. I don't like to be destructive to people around me that I care about.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful in that regard, I guess. I don't drink and drive. I don't, any of those things. I take that responsibility. But I like to drink. I like to smoke pot. I like to do hallucinogenics sometimes. Like there's certainly, I'm a searcher. But post-pandemic, that got cemented into me, the whole like live for today thing. Yeah. And so I really try to focus on that. And just, I don't know, maybe I'll be one of those weirdos that lives to be 90. I don't think so. I think if I make it to 80, that'd be amazing. But also it's quality of life stuff. I see my folks, they're 74, 75, and they're very active still. They're slowed down a little bit, of course, but like they're still doing a lot of stuff. They still, we took them to see The Who, like they're still very active. And so, in terms of end of life stuff, it's, I don't really think about it too much because I'm like, it'll happen when it'll happen. And, certainly pull the plug on me if I'm in a vegetative state or if I don't know who I am anymore, like.
We'll use this as a documentation for you.
Yeah. This is my, my DNR. play this back. Yeah. But thank you again, man, for all the generosity you've shown me over the years. It's so appreciated. And, I really love coming here. It's like an oasis of awesomeness every time.
Well, it goes both ways. I know it's, as nice as it is here, it's still another stop, and we appreciate you guys coming by.
So. Yeah, it's the best. It's a little recharge for us. So.
All right, sir.
Thanks, buddy.
Enjoy the drive to Richmond.
Yeah, gotta go.
All right. See you, man.
Thanks, man.
You can't hang on to yourself. You don't have to try not to hang on to yourself. It can't be done, and that is salvation. The most important thing for anyone to realize is that you and every person you see will soon be dead.